Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, or whenever you may be tuning in to the Growing Our Future podcast. We just love bringing this podcast to all the listeners and folks that get to watch, whether it's Texas FFA members, teachers, advisors, sponsors, or stakeholders, because we have incredible guests that bring insights and experiences they're encouraging, they're empowering, and the bottom line, they help us grow both personally and professionally. And today is no exception. Today we have Dr. Mindy Brashears. Dr. Brashears, thank you for joining us today for the Growing Our Future podcast.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always an honor to visit with you anytime, but it's especially an honor whenever we get to impact the state of Texas and beyond with good agricultural information.
We're going to dive into that here in just a second, but I got to tell you, the way I start all of these podcasts is with the same question. And I love to hear from our guest today, Dr. Brashears. What are you grateful for?
That is a great question. I mean, first and foremost, I'm grateful to be able to be involved in the field of agriculture. I have tremendous faith. God has just given me so many things, my family, my career, and just the things that have happened in my life that I could have never planned or arranged. And I look back on my time in high school, FFA, and I tell the story many times that I had a high school ag teacher, and there weren't very many girls in ag at the time. And so that kind of dates me. And I remember him coming into my classroom whenever I was a freshman. He said, "Do you want to be an ag?" And I was like, "Yes." And I recruited a couple of other girls to go with me. My intentions were probably to be around more of the boys at the time. But, I think back on that day, I was in FFA and in ag class all the way through, and how that really impacted me to be able to go beyond the high school ag classroom all the way up to becoming, undersecretary of ag. You just never know what those little decisions that you make and the people that influence your life at any given moment, where that's going to lead you. So grateful for family and God and agriculture and what I get to do every day.
Well, I echo that, by the way. I think that when we focus and we begin our days and reflect on what we're grateful for, I think it sure puts in perspective our day, the things that we have. And I find energy in that. And I think it kind of helps fuel where we can go.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. There's always something good, even in the bad, you can find the good.
Well, let's start off. And you gave me a little brief intro there. That was really good. So let's dive a little bit deeper. Share with everybody kind of what your title is now, what your role is now, and then kind of walk us through that pathway that got you to where you're at.
Sure. Currently, I am a professor at Texas Tech University. I have a lot of other titles that go with that. I was recently named a Horn Professor, which is the highest honor at Texas Tech as far as being promoted in the realm of being a professor at the university. I'm also an endowed chair and the Roth and Lech family endowed my position. So I'm very honored to be able to carry that title. And I am the Associate Vice President for Research at Texas Tech University and the Director of our International Center for Food Industry Excellence. It's a little bit ridiculous, all of those titles. So I wear many hats. I have been at Texas Tech just over 20 years. I'm actually starting my 21st year as a professor. I actually went there for my undergrad degree, but I took a little break from the university for the past 4 years. I have lived in Washington, D.C., and I served as Undersecretary of Agriculture for Food Safety and with the previous administration. This was a position I really never aspired to be. Now, I always looked up to the position because it was the highest ranking food safety official in the US. You don't apply for that job. Someone from Congress or USDA calls you and says, "Hey, would you put your name in the hat for this?" And you kind of go through a vetting process that ends with the Senate confirmation and a vote by the full Senate. So it was a very long process. And when I said yes the first time, I really never thought I would get to the finish line. So I'm very grateful for that. But I was able to oversee food safety for the country. That include all imported foods and meat and poultry, and oversaw the food inspection system. But I'm very happy to be back at Texas Tech. It really put in perspective that my heart is for raising up the next generation of leaders in agriculture. We need those leaders at home on the farm, all the way to Washington, D.C., influencing policy.
Wow.
So that's a lot.
We can stop right there. That was great. And that's what this is all about, by the way, Dr. Brashears, is, I'm always fond of saying, if you want to know what the future is, grow it.
Yes.
And that's what agriculture taught me. It taught me that what we plant and what we nurture, that's what we're going to grow. And I can't think of anything more noble than planting seeds of greatness in young people today that will be dynamic influencers just like you tomorrow. So thank you for what you shared, because that was outstanding.
Oh, well, you're welcome. Yeah.
I had the pleasure of recently hearing you make a presentation at Midwestern State University, along with Keith Klein who used to be with CorePoint, and Greg Crouchley with Justin Brands. But during that presentation, you said some things that really got my attention. And I'd really like to kind of extract some of those and see if you can actually share, do they have roots back to your FFA and Ag Ed experience? Okay.
Okay, sure.
During that presentation, you shared some of the challenges that we faced early in the pandemic as it related to supply chain and accessing the resources, navigating the protocols and regulations. And all through that, as I listened to you speak, I thought about critical thinking skills. I thought about problem solving skills. I thought about communication skills. But all of these things came to my mind when I heard you navigate probably one of the most difficult times in our American food chain history. And with that, would you mind sharing kind of what happened and how you worked through some of those challenges?
Absolutely. And you're so right. What you do as a student, you may not know that you might carry on to the highest level of government one day, but that's absolutely what happened. During the early days of the pandemic, I'm talking March and April of 2020, our first concern was making sure that we had inspectors in the plants. So we had to, if there were no inspectors present, you couldn't produce the food. We still had to operate under inspection. So we were concerned about that, and were very strategic to make sure that happened. But then the workers in the facility started getting sick. In a short amount of time, we were reduced from 100% capacity in beef and pork slaughter to 50%. This started creating a situation where the country could run out of food. During this time, it was the early days, and we were out of toilet paper in the country, and people were kind of losing their mind over that. If you can imagine the panic that could ensue from a food shortage. So it really brought to mind that food security is a matter of national security. This progressed all the way up to the president, and he signed an order under the Defense Production Act and delegated his authority to Secretary Perdue. He was Secretary of Ag, to make sure that our food plants stayed open and the country had food. The secretary turned to me and said, "I need you to take care of this." My first thought was, I didn't sign up for this. This was not my job. Wow. But you look back and really, who would be trained for doing something like that? It's enormous. But I had the foundational skills, like you said, problem solving, critical thinking, communication, mediating between different parties. And that's what we did. I want to say that never once did we use that executive order. We never had to force anyone to open. Instead, I went in, studied the situation. We weren't going to make a company open if their employees were sick and putting the employees at risk. So we brought in the CDC, and the CDC put in guidelines on how to mitigate the risk, putting up barriers. We switched to masks and face shields. There were very limited testing resources. Dr. Redfield from the CDC would send a jet out to the plants, and they would test the workers that were asymptomatic, not necessarily sick, but to see if they were on the verge of getting sick, send the samples out to California, and then we could say, okay, you have X number of employees that can operate. It's not at full capacity, but you can operate. We would get on the phone with everyone from the governor to the state commissioner of ag to the local sheriff and make sure everyone was on the same page and very comfortable with the decisions we made. It took about 3 or 4 weeks, but we did get again to 90% capacity. This was helping utilize different resources to move, animals from plant to plant, maybe from Texas to Nebraska or Nebraska to Texas where they were operating, expanding shifts, expanding resources to the facilities so we could continue to operate. There was no guidebook. There was no plan that someone had experienced in the past to do this, but you had to draw on your experience, what you had done in the past in order to make this happen and to keep it successful. I always say, well, one day I might interview for a job and they may ask, have you ever managed a crisis? And I'm just going to say, did you eat during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic? I'll say, well, you're welcome. That was my job. It was crazy. And then, ending up on the phone with the president and the vice president and answering to them, no matter what your politics are, being on the phone with the president is, a little intimidating. So it was quite a responsibility, but I'm honored that I got to do it. I'm happy to look back on it. I feel like we were very successful. It's not something that I anticipate or hope that I get to do again someday.
Well, and I don't think any of us do. And, in Washington, D.C., one of my favorite places to visit is the Jefferson Memorial. And, Jefferson, I believe it's in there. He's got a lot of quotes, and I hope I don't get this wrong. If I do, I apologize, and we can correct it. But I want to say it was in there that he said, out of challenging times come great leaders. And I think that's what our country was faced with, is we were faced with a time where it wasn't just the marquee folks of the White House or the Congress. Dr. Brashears, I think it was people like you that might not have ever been the face of what was going on, that were really those marquee leaders that had to find real solutions to the challenges that we faced. And when you look back on it now, I'm just curious, as you look back on it now, what might be some takeaways that you learned through that experience? What were some things that really stood out to you through that experience?
Well, first of all, I am a scientist and I like to make data-driven and science-based decisions. Well, we were at a time where there was no data or science. And at that time, you have to, first and foremost, pray for wisdom. That's every day. I was like, God help us, because you just didn't know what you were going to face on any given day. And use your experiences, what you have learned in the past, to make the most solid decision you can based on the information you have in hand, putting the people first, putting the country first, making sure that you were very logical in doing that. I pulled on every resource that I could possibly garner from, other countries, the leadership of other countries, what they were doing, and especially the secretary. He is such a wise man. I was so honored to be able to work with him, his experience in government, and he's a veterinarian, so he has a good science-based background. And so I was very honored to be able to have him as my mentor and someone that really stood beside me through various challenges that we had to face.
I mean, we could sit here and talk about, I'm fascinated by this. One of my board members, I believe, Dr. Justin Ransom.
Yes, absolutely.
Dr. Ransom and I, we go way back, all the way to when he was in high school. But one of the things that, I remember Dr. Ransom, when he was working through his career, he was in charge of some supply chain at some time. And this was a big brand company, by the way. And
Yes.
and I'm sitting here thinking, we're working on a strategic plan for a little state nonprofit foundation. Now, I think we got big ideas, but in terms of scope, we're really kind of small. And when I start thinking about the scope of supply chain and strategic planning, it doesn't have to be overwhelming, because like you said, as long as you can dissect data and you can look at it, you can kind of make some informed decisions as to kind of what direction you might need to move. But I remember one of the things that you said during that presentation that you made that again caught my attention is, I grew up at Cal Farley's Boys Ranch outside of Amarillo there in the Texas Panhandle. And we grew our own food, and, we harvested our own food. And you kind of understood how much you had to take to feed everybody that was on the ranch. Well, part of that included, taking our animals and harvesting our animals. We'd harvest 10 hogs and 5 beef a week. And I would have never thought that we'd had a CO2 shortage.
Yeah.
And you shared this challenge. Again, these are things that on the surface, people it may not be on their radar screen, but I'm going to tell you, somebody that was in those meat processing plants, what you shared, I'm sitting here and I'm scratching my head going, oh my gosh, what did you do? Walk us through what happened on the CO2 issue.
Yeah. So yes, the most bizarre things, there's a logistics of keeping the facilities open and having people healthy and putting them in a healthy environment so they didn't get sick and all of those things. But then, yes, we had a challenge with CO2. Well, the poultry industry and the hog industry utilized the CO2 to stun the animals, which is very important that we have humane handling. Right. It is a federal law. It's a statutory law. We have to have humane handling, for beef and pork and best practices for poultry. Well, when you run out of CO2, there's no way to stun them. They couldn't reconfigure the plants overnight and go to a different method. So the USDA regulations were written, it had to be food grade CO2. Probably when that was written, it was, it just made sense. So we had to put together a team of veterinarians to be able to say utilizing commercial grade was safe. It didn't have any impact on the food in order to keep that supply going for the facility. And, it's not something that comes to mind. And this was a result of, different industries switching to making hand sanitizer instead of alcohol, perhaps, and just different things that impacted CO2 production within the country. Also, closed borders, the inability to, get things from China, as we've seen, with the car industry and different industries in the US that still have an impact on us. So we had to be very creative in making sure that we were meeting the needs of the country without compromising safety and working very quickly to make decisions. Another thing we had to do was a lot of the food was in warehouses destined for schools, for hotels and institutional type places. And the labeling on that is different from what you see in the grocery store. It wasn't, there's nothing wrong with it, but it was a bulk label, like on a large box. Well, we passed a, temporary ruling where you could basically put a sticker on a food service or a school pack of bacon and it could go to the supermarket. And that's why, for a while you saw some interesting packaging in the supermarket, but we got that out of the warehouse because it was already produced, it was already available, and got it to the consumer in the retail market. These decisions and these challenges came to us every single day. Members of Congress were calling, even asking, well, can you just waive inspection so people could just kill, harvest their animal without inspection and sell the meat? Well, we never went to that extreme. And there are several reasons. Obviously, number one is food safety. You just don't know what kind of disease that animal might be carrying that you could pass on. The second reason is international trade. We would ruin our export market if we, circumvented our rules for inspection. When I took the job, I never thought I would have to defend the need for food inspection, but I did many times.
Well, I mean, again, I share my personal journey and my story, because I'm going to tell you, working in that processing plant with a USDA inspector, you realize just how much care goes into ensuring the food safety of that animal protein. And I just want to brag on that, by the way, because we have a lot.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. I always brag on FSIS. I love the employees. They were so dedicated to the job and they took it very seriously.
I'm gonna just kind of derail here and tell you a quick story, and I'm gonna let you piggyback on this because I think it really speaks to what you have done and what those before you did and what y'all will continue to do into the future. We have a doctor in our church. He and his wife, their ministry is a little town over in Africa, and they take doctors over and they take care of the children in this village, and they're seeing some improvement in that village, both in health, education, several things. It's very interesting. So I asked him one time, I said, Dr. Johnson, I said, what is it that you really need? I mean, what is it that we could help you with? I mean, I know you come to us for ibuprofen, for allergy medicines, those kind of things, but what do you really need? And he said, we really need money. And I said, well, what for? And he said, because we've got to put in our first 2 orders. And I said, well, I don't understand. Tell me what you mean by orders. And this is what he shared. He said, Aaron, he goes, when we go over there and these children walk up to all these doctors and physicians and medical staff, they'll always ask them, what's wrong with you? And he said, these kids can be as young as 8, 9, 10 years old, and they will point to their heads and they'll point to their hind ends, and they will say worms and worms. And these children will tell you about the 5 parasites that are living in their gut. They know what they are. These are children, and they know that something is not right with them. So the first 2 orders that they put in are for wormer and for vitamins, so that they can get the children systems free of the parasite, so that the nutrients of what food we can provide them will get them healthier, safer, and back on track. So when I think about the role that, I think we are so blessed in this country. I don't know how many types of Doritos there are, but you could stand in the Dorito aisle and be overwhelmed. You could stand in a toothpaste aisle and be overwhelmed. We have so much abundance, and the abundance that we have, Dr. Brashears, is safe.
Yes.
It's safe, and it's safe because we got people like you and your colleagues and others that want best practices, that say, here's what we've got to do to maintain this, so that we don't have the challenges that some of these other countries have. But I just want to thank you, because that when you really put in perspective all the bounty that we have a lot to be grateful for.
You're so right on that. I mean, and you forget, because people don't realize what goes into getting food on the shelf to make it safe, to make it abundant, to make it taste good. And again, that's just why my heart is so strong into agriculture, and why, like I say, I want to grow the next generation of leaders. We have to have those kids going into ag-related fields to make sure that it stays that way. It's so important. I never aspired to go into agriculture. I only did because I got an FFA scholarship. And at the time I was required to major in ag, and ended up realizing, oh, wow, this is great. My goal, I was going to go to medical school. I wanted to be a biology major. And I started out in animal science. I was like, that's very similar. But because of that FFA scholarship, it directed me to ag, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me, for sure.
Wow. Where did you go to, what high school were you from?
I was at Wheeler High School in Wheeler, Texas.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Dr. Temple Grandin, one time I was at a workshop with her, and we had a chance to visit, and I'll never forget something that she said that day, and you just echoed it one more time. She said, more kids need to be exposed to agriculture because they may find a career there.
Yes, absolutely. So
she found hers there, and you found yours. That's incredible.
Yes, it is.
So you kind of already pulled us right into our next topic, and that is for students out there that may be listening right now, for teachers that may be listening, are Are there any real career opportunities in agriculture? I mean, I heard that there's only 2% farmers anymore, 3% farmers anymore. Well, why should I even look at something like that? Kind of give us a big picture of opportunities that may exist in food.
Yeah, that is such a great point, and it is a misperception that so many people have, including myself. So I was in that boat. I grew up on a farm. My parents still farm and ranch in Wheeler County. It's still a passion. I love that part of the industry, but I didn't realize it went so far beyond that. I ended up in food science. Many of you might be, the listeners might be familiar with meat science if you're involved in meat judging. That industry alone is huge. We place all of our graduates in the industry doing anything from food safety, which is, obviously where I landed, but also product development, coming up with all those different flavors of Doritos or beef jerky or whatever it might be, all of the different products on the shelves. There are food scientists and meat scientists out there doing that. We have the field of biotechnology, and that could be related to crops or food or fiber production, anything related to agriculture. So we need those scientists. But if you're more on the social side, we also need people in ag economics, crunching the numbers, doing the social aspect. We need more teachers. Our ag teachers need to stay strong and, on top of current events and very relevant. And then just the whole field of leadership. Ag leadership is so important, which really touches very close to DC, obviously, but we also need those leaders in our commodity organizations, our state and local government who can speak and be an advocate for agriculture to get the right information out there. One of my big passions is driving the narrative in agriculture. Someone is going to fill the space and talk about agriculture. And if we're not driving it with truth and information, then through our good ag communications and our good ag communicators, then it's going to be incorrect, and it's probably not going to be positive. So there's many opportunities, many jobs, and if you're passionate about agriculture, and even if you don't know about agriculture, I really encourage you to check it out.
Well, I'm going to piggyback on that comment because that's one of mine, as you well know, that's one of my passions as well. And I'm going to say something here that one of our other guests said, because I thought this was spot on. I hope everybody heard what Dr. Brashears just said, because I'm going to tell you, it was absolutely 100% on target. And that is this: we don't just need a seat at the table. We need a voice at the table, and we need your voice at the table. We need young people who can communicate effectively, both in written form and in audio verbal form. We need you to be good emotional intelligence on social media, but we need you to be involved because we do need leaders. We need leaders, Dr. Brashears. By the way, Dr. Brashears, do you know Brooke Rollins?
I'm not familiar, no. Sorry.
She's a past state officer who also works in the administration at the White House.
Oh, okay. Oh, great.
She's from the Fort Worth area, and she's a PSO A&M graduate. But anyway, I hope to get her on the show here in the very near future because she had another accomplished career path.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's start to wrap up here. Give us 3 leadership tips. What would you tell somebody? I think you and I talked about this before, but I'm going to let you do it again. What would be 3 leadership tips you might give an FFA member to say, listen, try this, it'll work?
Okay, great. They might be different, but hopefully they get the same topics. First of all, build relationships. Meet as many people as you can. Build those relationships. And I always tell students that are just starting out, you should have a soundbite in your story. I think my husband, who's also in agriculture and is a professor, he says it's your elevator speech. But tell something about yourself that's unique and different. That person, you might look up to them and think, oh, they're they hold this position. I don't want to introduce myself. Don't think that. They're just people. I love it when people come up to me and introduce themselves, but tell them something unique about yourself so you can go back and say, hey, I met you. I told you a story about XYZ that would set you apart. so they can remember you. They may not remember your name, but they might remember that story. Second of all, you really need to make sure that you use data and science to make your decisions. You may not be a scientist, but make sure that you always have to consider the impact and the logistics and the emotion of it. But don't make the decision just on emotion. Make sure you're making it on facts and science and data. When you're in a position of influence, you want to make sure that long term your data and your opinion is going to stand up. I used to always tell my workers at FSIS, something would come out in the newspaper that was just really negative, but it was a spin. There might have been enough truth in it where they could publish it, but I'm like, the data and the science will stand. That is a solid foundation. The rest is chaff. It will blow away. I'm always using an analogy in some way. And then last of all, remember you're always sowing and reaping. And that could be in relationships, that could be in your education, or building tools in your toolbox. And you really want to build those tools. I had a wise woman tell me before I came to DC, she said, you have to do this because it's going to become another tool in your toolbox. You may not use it immediately, which I use it every single day, all the skills I learned, but it will be something you will use in the future. And every experience that you encounter, whether it be a judging contest or a speaking opportunity to interact with individuals, you put that in your toolbox and one day you will use it. I reflect back on my time in DC and I think of all the people that I have met, and it's just really expanded my circle of influence and the people that I can draw on if I need advice or other input for whatever decision I'm making. If I would have said no and not come to DC, I wouldn't even know those people. So always take those opportunities, saying yes to those new adventures, and build up your toolbox. So those are the three that come to mind at the moment. There's so many things you can talk about. I always say never burn the bridges. That goes back to relationships. Make sure you treat people right, even if you don't agree with them. You can disagree with someone and still be friends and still have a good conversation.
All of this is great, by the way. Everything that Dr. Brashears just said, I would tell you, I've used it. Matter of fact, in the Foundation Ambassador Program, Dr. Brashears at convention, we have hundreds of kids apply. We take 40 first time, 20 returning, and then we have 10 brand ambassadors. But one of the awards that we give is called the 3 Foot Award. And it's because we want them to learn to professionally network and get to know people that are around them, because the people that are around you are going to become your customers, your clients, your constituents, your colleagues. And I know you know this, and I tell people all the time, successful people know a lot of people.
Yeah.
And because you do, you're able to solve problems quicker. You can capitalize on opportunities quicker. And when I listen to Dr. Brashears talk about a time in our country's history that could have been very disruptive. It was disruptive, could have been worse. The fact that she had professional networks to call on and expertise to call on, I still am fat and happy. So
yeah. Well, hopefully everyone is. And so
I appreciate all of that. Okay, Dr. Brashears, I know I always ask a fun question. And the last time I ask you a question, every time I hear Fireball by Pitbull, I think of you, because I asked you what your favorite concert was, and you told me it was Pitbull. So I can't ask you that question again. So let me change gears and ask a fun question and say, what might be your favorite movie?
Oh dear. Okay. Well, I want to preface this by I don't like to have to think in movies. I like I like happy endings. So when probably the one that comes to mind is a movie. It's kind of old again. I'll date myself. It's Serendipity.
I remember.
And it also hits on a lot of the things we've talked about. It's like building. You have relationships, and you may chart your path and think that everything has to happen, but it's how other things come together to really end up, in the end to give you the happy ending. So I really like that movie. It's one of my favorites, and does have the happy ending. And so that's one of my favorite movies.
That's great. So now I've got something else. Every time I hear Pitbull, and now when I reminisce about serendipity,
yes,
I can think about that incredible leader in agriculture, Dr. Mindy
yeah.
Brashears.
Great. Well, maybe somebody will go watch.
Those are just great that, I think people need to hear that we're all human and we're all moved by a good song, good music, a good movie, a good book. And those are just, I'm like you though. I like sometimes just to unplug, and it doesn't have to be so serious.
Yeah, it does. I mean, my movies, I'm like, I don't want to have to think or watch anything bad. I like the really happy ending movies.
Well, Dr. Brashears, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it. For everybody that's tuned in and listening again, I hope that you can see that our themes are always consistent. And that is, again, if you want to know what the future is, grow it. And Dr. Brashears just shared with us some incredible seeds of greatness: relationship building, problem solving, use of science and data. Look around you at all the people that you're going to sit in classes with and think, these are going to be my colleagues one day, my customers, my constituents. Go travel, meet people outside of your realm, go to a ballet. I took my staff to an opera one time. It has nothing to do with agriculture. We go eat sushi. I mean, two things that are just different. And Dr.
Yes, get out of the box, have those experiences.
You shared that. It was great. So anyway, thank you for joining us today. Again, Dr. Brashears, keep on keeping on. Agriculture in this country is lucky to have you, and keep up the good work. For all the listeners, until we meet again, go out there, encourage someone, empower someone, and keep working hard to make our state, country a great place to live, work, and raise our families. Thank y'all for joining us today.